how if we continue in our own personal lives, in our professional lives, in our classrooms, in our experiences, if we continue to just work towards average, we are never going to grow or be successful in today's world. I work with a lot of gifted students and a lot of gifted adults. I can tell you what it's like to work in a university town where all of your university teachers, children, are smarter than you. And I mean that. And we're on our way to having about 700 identified students in the State College Area School District that have an IQ of 130 or more, which is 2 standard deviations above the mean. All kids can learn. All kids can learn. Think about that. Okay? So enjoy this. I hope you enjoy it. I love it, and I love listening to this man speak.
Just to shape the discussion, I'm going to talk a little bit about our new book, That Used to Be Us, for the next 10 minutes or so, because I think the framework that I can lay out here is one that will really guide our discussion. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the title of the book, That Used to Be Us, the first question they ask is, does it have a happy ending? And we tell everybody it does. It has a happy ending. We just don't know whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That really depends on us. The first chapter of this book is called If You See Something, Say Something. And as you all know, that is the mantra of the Homeland Security Department. But the theme of this book is that what we've seen is not a package behind a stairwell, not a suspicious-looking person. What we've seen is hiding in plain sight. And that is a country really not living up to its full potential. Now, this book has a backward-looking title, but a really forward-looking theme. Because we really believe that at the end of the day, we want China to do well, we want India to do well, we want Brazil to do well, but we really have nothing fundamentally to learn from these countries. The theme of this book is that the history we need to read is our own, and the country we need to rediscover is America. Because the basic theme of this book, thank you, is that we didn't get here by accident as a country. We didn't become the world's richest and most powerful country by accident. We actually got here because we had a formula for success. And it was actually the foundation of the greatest public-private partnership in the history of the world. And I know there's many people out there think, I got here, I did all this, I was one lonely guy. One lonely gal. I did all this on my own. You did nothing on your own, okay? You did this thanks to the greatest public-private partnership in the history of the world. And the public side of this was built on 5 pillars. First was educate our people up to and beyond whatever the technology is so they can get the most out of it, whether it was the cotton gin or the laptop computer. Second was have the world's best infrastructure to enhance commerce and communication. Third, it was have the most open immigration policy to attract the world's most energetic and talented immigrants who would then come and start, a quarter of the new companies every year in Silicon Valley. Fourth, it was have the best rules for investing to attract capital and to prevent recklessness. And lastly, have the world's most government-funded research to push out the boundaries of science and technology so our entrepreneurs could pluck off the best flowers and opportunities and build them into great new companies. That's how we got here. We actually had a formula for success. And the reason we are where we are today is if you look at all 5 of those pillars, the arrow is pointing down on all 5. That's how we got here. And therefore, we have not been able, we argue, to rise to the challenges we face today, to address them with the collective action we need, because all our problems today are so big they require collective action. What are those challenges? There's 3 we focus on in the book, and there's one I just want to say a few words about tonight, because it has to do with education. Those challenges are first to deal with what I believe is actually the biggest thing happening in the world today, but the least discussed. It's actually been masked by the Great Recession and by 9/11, and that is the merger of globalization and the IT revolution. I'll explain what I mean in a second. Second great challenge is obviously our debt and deficits and the whole entitlements question. The burden we don't want to be passing on to our children to make them into debt slaves. And lastly, how do we power our future, grow our middle class with energy, enough clean energy that we don't tip the planet into climate change? Those are the three great challenges we face today. Now let me go back to the first, and that will be a good segue, I think, into our discussion with the mayor, because I find it's the one that's most on people's mind. What I really found in writing this book is that there's a huge inflection point that the country and the world basically went through in the last decade. And that is, we basically went from a connected world to a hyper-connected world. And it's changing everything. And I really realized this when I sat down to write this book, and I went out and got the first edition of The World is Flat, which I worked on in 2004, began working on. And that book was basically saying the world's gotten connected. I opened the index of that first edition and I looked under F, and Facebook wasn't in it. So when I was out there saying the world is flat, basically for most people Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was a sound, the cloud was in the sky, 4G was a parking place, LinkedIn was a prison, applications were what you sent to college, and for most people Skype was a typo. All of that just happened in the last 6 years. And it has taken the world from connected to hyper-connected. Now, what are the implications of this? This has fundamentally changed the labor market, because more and more bosses today have access not only to hyper-productive automation, software, and robots, and not just cheap labor anymore, but also cheap genius. If 10 years ago globalization was affecting blue-collar workers, today it's really hitting white-collar workers because of this hyper-connectivity. If the world were graded on a curve, the curve has basically risen. And that's why we have a chapter in the book that's called Average is Over. Average is now over. Because if you just do average work now, you will not earn average returns, not in a hyper-connected world. You know, we mentioned just one tiny example in the book, Grinnell College, a wonderful liberal arts college up in Iowa, 1,600 students. My mother-in-law went to Grinnell, great college. Last year, 2010, 8.3% of applications to Grinnell College came from China. Of those 8.3%, 43%, nearly half, had perfect 800s on their math SATs, okay? The whole global curve is rising now. You are literally competing against students at PS21 in Shanghai now. It is not just a metaphor, it's the reality if you want to go to Grinnell College. Now, what we did in the book was actually interview, before we talked about education, we thought, well, let's interview employers and ask them, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? So we interviewed high-end white-collar head of a Washington law firm, low-end white-collar head of an outsourcing firm in India, blue-collar, DuPont, and green-collar, biggest green-collar firm in the world, the U.S. Army. And here's what we found in talking to employers. They're all looking for the same employee, someone who can do critical thinking and problem solving, ... in order to get an interview. Yeah, see, that's now table stakes, critical thinking and reasoning. Because actually what every employer is really looking for are people who can not only do their job, but invent, reinvent, and re-engineer the job. Because in a hyper-connected world, change is happening so fast, the big boss up there cannot keep track of it anymore. You need employees, literally, who are touching the product and the processes to be able to invent, reinvent, and re-engineer their job. That's what everyone's looking for. So the head of the law firm in Washington, D.C., head of a national law firm, his name is Jeff Less. He's head of the Washington office of Nixon Peabody. This actually started during the subprime crisis. I asked Jeff, what happens to a law firm in a crisis like this? Oh, Tom, we're laying off people. I said, that's interesting. Who gets laid off first in a law firm? Is it last in, first out? I said, well, not anymore. Now, he said, the people who are getting laid off are people who, in the credit bubble, we had all this work, we gave them the work, they did it, they handed it back in a nice way. A lot of them are gone. The ones who we're keeping are those who said, Jeff, you know, we could do this old work in a new way, or we could do new work in a new way. Head of the green collar firm, General Martin Dempsey, that's a name you may have heard of. He just became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But General Dempsey, when we interviewed him, one reason he got that job was head of the U.S. Army Education Corps. And he told us this story. He actually, General Dempsey, was the commander of the 1st ID, the 1st Armored Division, that took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein in 2003. In 2008, he found himself as head of CENTCOM, the whole Middle East Command. And he went out to visit a base in far-flung Afghanistan, somewhere near the Hindu Kush, as head of CENTCOM. Base was commanded by a captain. He sat down and talked to that captain for an hour, and he told us this. After an hour with that captain, he realized that that captain at that far-flung base had access to more intelligence at the tactical and national level and more firepower than he, General Dempsey, had when he commanded the 1st ID that took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein 5 years earlier. Therefore, how you choose that captain and how you train that captain becomes fundamentally different, which is why one of the first things he did when he took over the Army Education Corps was change boot camp. Now, in many cases, new recruits are given an iPhone, and within 3 weeks, they may be told to download the app. Drill instructor sits in the front row, you teach the lesson. This is going on in every company and every, basically, institution. We need people who can do 2 things now. Not only do the job, but invent the job. I'm an old fuddy-duddy, I'm 58. I got to find a job when I graduated college. Your kids will increasingly have to invent a job. And that, therefore, the challenge for education now is twofold. We need to bring the bottom to the average. We have so many young people in this country who are below average, but we need to bring our average so much higher. One requires more education, the other requires better education with that creative, innovative gene. Last word. Parents will ask me this, and we have a whole section in the book about this. So what do I tell my kids?
This is so important.
Very simple.
Take anything
we have
away.
3 pieces of advice. Tell your kids to think like a new immigrant, tell them to think like an artisan, and tell them to think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm from. Think like an immigrant? How does an immigrant think? An immigrant thinks, I'm new in this city, I'm new in this state, Chicago, and nothing is owed me. There is no legacy place at the University of Chicago waiting for me. I better figure out what city I'm in. I better figure out what world I'm in. I better figure out where the opportunities are, and I better go after them with more energy and verve and focus than the next person. Friends, we are all new immigrants to the hyper-connected world. Second, think like an artisan. This is an idea from Larry Katz at Harvard, labor economist. Who was the artisan? The artisan was that person in the Middle Ages who made every product one-off, made every saddle individually, every pair of shoes individually, every purse, every utensil, every tool individually. And the best artisans brought something so extra to their work, they carved their initials in it. Do your job every day as if you'd be ready to carve your initials into it at the end of that day. Finally, think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House. I was working on this book out in Minneapolis, my hometown, having breakfast with my friend Ken Greer at Perkins on Highway 100, 7 in the morning. I ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and scrambled eggs. Ken ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and fruit. And after 15 minutes, the waitress came, put our plates down, and all she said to Ken was, I gave you extra fruit. She got a 50% tip from us. Because she didn't control much, but she controlled the fruit ladle. And that was her extra. All of us have some extra in us. We all can't be Steve Jobs maybe, but we all have something extra to bring to that job. Promise me you will nurture and find that extra in yourself and in your kids, because average is officially over. We all need to live in Lake Wobegon, where all the men are strong, all the women are beautiful, and all the kids are above average. Thank you very much.
I share that because, as I said earlier, you are each other's competition. Okay? If you are not involved in your school somehow, if you are not setting yourself apart, if you are not creating opportunities for your students and for yourself and for your even supervising teacher or whatnot, even in your university, you're doing yourself a disservice. And think about the way you go into an interview and when every person answers interview questions the same way. I had a student teach in Pittsburgh in a very, very difficult school for me. I had grown up as, pastor's son who never left the house, so I was very naive and didn't really know the world. And then I did some student teaching up in State College where it was pretty much the same thing. And then I was shipped to McKeesport, outside of Pittsburgh, where I was no longer a majority in a classroom. And it was the hardest, most difficult experience that I ever had. But I coached powder puff football. And it was one of the best experiences I had that led me to connect with kids and adults in a way that when I go to interviews and have interviewed, I talk about my experiences. Okay? So again, I want you to be thinking about what you are doing in your experiences to set yourself apart and to be above average. And it also lends itself to be thinking about what you can be doing with your students. Okay? I said something earlier, and I know that some people will disagree and say that, all kids can't learn. Well, obviously they can, otherwise they would just be a blob of nothing sitting on the floor. They learn to write, they learn to talk, maybe they learn to write, they learn to communicate somehow. Okay, so we're learning some things. Some schools have a lot more resources than others, but I want you to be thinking about what he's saying in terms of average, and that there's little things that we can control in our lives. And as we continue to move through this hyper-extended world, okay, there's one thing that I always come back to, and it's what George Couros says, an education author. Compliance does not foster innovation. You may work in a school where you aren't allowed to innovate. You may work in a school where it is very much a whip in compliance. Okay? But there are small things that you can do for your children and your children's lives. Okay? That will allow it to be a new experience and a new way for them. If you were at a school like Maureen or Jill's, it doesn't take much for these kids to be introduced to something that's a little bit different or a little bit above average. And regardless of whether you have resources or not, okay, don't get sucked into the excuses. Okay? Be that change and be that above average for those kids. And sometimes that takes thought. It takes creativity. Okay? It takes a team. It takes a professional learning network. If you're not on Twitter and following things on Facebook that are teachers and talking, if you're not following the hashtag EdChat on Twitter right now, you're doing a disservice to your future kids to constantly be learning. I can never forget the one day I walked into a classroom and see a teacher who I had known, he was my next door neighbor my entire life, pulled out his file, he goes, "That's the same lesson plan I've been doing since 1980. What? And then knowing that there were students like Lindsay, and you all at that point, who were literally sitting through that. What can you do to be different? What can you do to be above average? What can you do to make yourself stand out in this job and career? So I'm almost done because I could speak for hours on this. But the last thing I have for you is a little matrix of educational technology applications that some of you may be familiar with and some of you may not. If I were you, and I know Melissa, I don't know what Melissa's plans would be, but how's what's going on here? Yeah. I'm going to tell you something. These new apps and programs pop up so quickly, you can't even stay focused on what's out there. Okay? But if I were you, for your own professional experience, okay, whether you have a group chat or a Facebook group or whatnot, take 10 minutes to look into some of these and see if they could be used some way in your classroom. You know, I know that in Jill's classroom, she may not have access to computers, and she may not have access to iPads, but I can guarantee you probably almost every one of those families has a cell phone. Are you capitalizing on that? That's one way to connect with kids and be a little above average. Have you seen the app called Remind, which is safe texting and communication to families? You know they all have cell phones, no matter their socioeconomic status. When I was a principal, I saw first graders have cell phones. Kindergartner got one for Christmas. On the left side is learning management systems. I know you guys use Canvas here. Schoology. Schoology has a free platform where you can build your own little mini course. What can you do to differentiate for kids? Okay? Average is over. You're going to be teaching the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. Some kids are going to take 2 days to get through something, some that probably can teach it better than you. What experiences are you providing for them? Maybe you have a little mini course that you've put together that you can show them through that. Edmodo is a great one. It's like the Facebook of learning management systems. There's some of these that I've never even heard of before, that I haven't had the time in my experiences to even be able to go through. Khan Academy. I can't tell you. This is a real quick story because I know we're running out of time. I have a family that I'm working with in State College. Kid's 3rd grade. Oh, how's the 3rd grader? What, like 8, 9?
8, 9.
Okay. Is so smart. He's in Algebra 1. He's in an 8th grade course as a 3rd grader. Age. Parents told me over the summer, he's breezing past Khan Academy. Like, he's already mastering like Algebra 1. I'd really like him to teach himself geometry so he can take Algebra 2 next year as a 4th grader at the high school. Whoa! Whoa! You want your 4th grader to be in a class with 15, 16, 17 year olds. Is that what you're talking about? Oh, well, that's true. But on the other part of that, because I like to think of both things, I had another family come in to tell me, I'd like my daughter to take a risk. No, we don't do that. We don't take risks. I want her to take online Algebra 2. Okay, but we don't do that. Well, we'd like you to take a risk. I said, sorry, it's something we not do. He's like, let me tell you a little story. He said, I'm an Asian American. Haven't been there. Let me say this. He moved to America, is raising his children as Asian Americans. And he said to me, as I moved here with nothing, new immigrant, I've started my own business. I've opened 2 or 3 more. And all that has happened because I took a risk. Why is education so non-risky? They're not getting it the way you've been teaching traditionally. Maybe there's your call to action. What can we be doing differently? Take a risk. Your principals may not support it, but that's okay. It's the mind shift that I want you to be thinking about. It's those little things that you can do. Connecting with technology, connecting with your professional learning network. Set yourself above average. Because I'm telling you right now, if you apply to State College, you will be an application of 1 in 450, 500 that we see. And if you think it doesn't get boring listening to teacher interviews when everybody says the same thing, it won't happen. Last point. When we were hiring teachers, Melissa and I, one year, we had one teacher come in and wasn't even interviewing for a classroom position, but just like blew up the interview. And Melissa says, I want you. She did something different, and Melissa felt that connected experience. And hopefully she's still doing it.
It's not my team. My old one.
Yeah,
She's still my neighbor.
still doing it. Okay? So, that's all I have to say, is I just want you to be above average, take risks, and be innovative. And just remember these things, okay? You're not going to all work in places where you can do that, okay? But communicate with us, talk with us, share your experiences, build your own professional network. We may not get back to you right away because some of our inboxes are very full. However, we can definitely be available to help support you. Questions? Or email addresses on the board?
Mine's on the paper. Mine's on my paper too.
Well, I didn't do that, so.
Anybody else have any questions?